Last week, we talked about how information and action need to be integrated together. This week, we're going to talk about how to do it without breaking your clients' brains. I'm Dr. Katrina Mitchum, and I've been designing and redesigning courses online since 2009. Okay, so we know that your learners should be actively learning and applying things. If you don't, go check out last week's video. But we can't just smash together 6 concepts and 6 actions and call it good, because we still end up with cognitive overload, and that is too much for the brain to handle at one time. The brain gets overloaded in learning spaces because we have 3 types of load competing for space. Okay, we have intrinsic load. What that means is the difficulty of the thing that you are actually trying to teach them. That's just inherent in what they're trying to learn. For example, content marketing is complex. That's intrinsic load. That's something that we can't really control. What we can control is how much we pile on at once without them integrating previous concepts. The second type of load is extraneous load. This is the difficulty that we add by designing crappy courses. So this is confusing navigation, clutter, unclear instructions, not connecting why they're doing certain things to the goals, right? Accessibility. These are the things that we can actually control in a curriculum development that will help them be able to just focus on the difficulty of the thing they're trying to learn. And then we have germane load. And germane load is the work of actually learning, right? Like, learning isn't intended to necessarily be easy. We have to hit that right level of just difficult enough to be interesting and spark curiosity, but not so difficult that it doesn't create a barrier. So this is the work of making connections, applying concepts. This is what transfers that stuff from short-term memory to long-term memory so that they can use it in their own contexts. This is kind of the load that we want to make space for, right? Because it's the good stuff. This is the good stuff of learning. So the problem that we run into is we got too much load. If the intrinsic load and the extraneous load, so just the fact that the topic is not an easy one, and we've put a lot of BS in to trip them up. If those things become so high that the load capacity is full, then they won't have space for the type of learning and integration that will help them actually do the thing and make the change. So our solution is strategic chunking. And that is one small piece of knowledge and one immediate action that's small enough to leave room for the actual learning. This is one of the ways that we build the design so that they don't get tripped up, especially if that intrinsic load is already pretty high. Okay, so what makes a good chunk? This isn't a topic, this isn't a module theme, this is one specific thing that they'll do. Always start with the do. So a bad example might be email marketing, right? That's a topic, that's too broad. Another bad example might be learning about email types. This one is just focus on knowledge. So we make this better by saying writing your welcome email. One specific skill that's small. I have said it a million times and I will continue to say it another million times, only focusing on what they need to do the actual thing. So that means you're only giving them the information that helps them do the thing. Not everything about email marketing. Just what is in a welcome email? What makes it work? Here's some examples. Write yours. A good chunk also has immediate action. They do the thing while the information is still in their working memory. Not later, not at the end of the module, right now. So a good check for this is to ask yourself, can they hold the information and do the action in one sitting? One reasonable sitting, right? You're not asking them to sit through a 30-minute video and also sit there and write the email that, if writing is hard for them, might take them an hour. An hour and a half to do that is unreasonable. So I'm going to give you another example of that here. Let's say that we are going to chunk something into choosing 3 brand colors using contrast checker, right? So the knowledge is What is contrast? Why it matters? The action is using a tool and picking 3 colors. So this means that we take those 2 knowledge pieces and the action pieces, and we've got 4 things that we're asking them to do, right? That fits in our working memory. Something that's too big for that space is creating your complete brand color palette. Or something like if the knowledge is color theory, psychology, contrast, accessibility, and meaning, that's more than 5 things that we're trying to give them in terms of information. And then if the action is selecting the primary, secondary, accents, testing the combinations, that's more than 4 things. And we now have cognitive overload. We are asking them to do too many things at once. So the best way to create your chunks is to work backwards. So start with the goal. What is the final thing that they'll do when you know that goal has been reached? For example, it might be create an Instagram content strategy. Step 2, what do they need to do right before that? Then what do they need to do right before that? And you continue to work your way backwards until you get to that first step. Then you go back through and break those steps down as far as you need to until you get to the point where you're not asking them to understand color theory and buying psychology and all of those things in order to pick some colors, right? You're working their way up to being able to do that. And if you start from the doing, right, from the actual things they need to accomplish, then you know that you can very easily only go in and give them the minimal knowledge, right? So if I know that I need to go and identify 3 content pillars, you're going to tell me why it's important, how to do it, and then what to do, right? You're not going to give me all of this theory about content pillars and how it's worked for some people. And like, there's going to be no extra BS in the course content. Okay, so some common chunking mistakes to avoid. Mistake number 1 is chunking based on topic and not action or skill or thing they're actually doing. That is probably the number 1 mistake I see in course creation, is starting with chunking things up by topic instead of chunking it up by the doing. Mistake 2 is breaking it into smaller chunks, right? So it's more manageable, but things still feel separated, right? So it's still understand the thing and then go do the thing instead of weaving them together and explaining why they're connected and why those things are connected to the next chunk or the previous chunk. Mistake 3 is chunking by time instead of cognitive load. So typically videos under 10 minutes is a good rule of thumb because in most cases that is the cognitive load max for teaching things that are dense. But sometimes things need extra examples because they're extra complicated. Like things that I have been putting in my YouTube channel over the last few weeks. Okay, so I am going to give you a real example. Let's say that I'm teaching a course on course creation. Chunk 1 might be write 1 learning outcome. So the action I'm going to have them do is write 1 learning outcome for their course. The knowledge that I have to give them is what is an outcome, what makes it good, and how to actually write one, right? Giving them the tools how to write one. And then feedback, right? And so this can be self-feedback or this can be feedback that I give them on does it describe an action? This is something that is very manageable. Okay, chunk 2 would be from that outcome, choose the step that has to be taken right before you know they've reached the outcome. So the action is going to be writing down that last step before it's reached. The knowledge that they need to do that is working backward from that outcome and identifying, right, like the actual prerequisites. And then feedback would be either self-feedback or feedback from me. If they did this step, if your client did this step, would they be ready for your outcome? Chunk 3 would look like writing the list of tasks that they need to do before that step gets checked off. The action is listing out the specific tasks from the step that they did in chunk 2. The information that they need is how to break that step into concrete tasks that are small enough without being too small. And then the feedback that they might either think about themselves or get from me is, if their client completed the tasks, would the step be done? So why this works. We are managing the cognitive load here for them, right? We are building it into our design. We have a small intrinsic load, right? We're doing one thing at a time. We have a low extraneous load because things are clear, they're simple, and they're very clearly connected to each other. That means we have room for the germane load where the actual learning is going to take place, which leads to creating transfer, right? They're doing something, which means they're actively processing it. Active processing means they are then moving it to long-term memory, and each chunk is reinforcing through practice, right? They're going to have to do these chunks multiple times in order to have all of the things they need for a full course, or determining where that cutoff is so that they have a collection of mini courses, or like there's a lot of other decisions that you would need to make, but you can continue applying these things. And that means that you'd eventually be able to do this on your own. It also builds progressively. So each piece is building on what they just did. Remember that chunking isn't just about making things smaller. It's about, can they hold the knowledge and do the thing in a session? If yes, then it's a good chunk. If not, you'll either want to break it down smaller or sequence it differently. So now you know how to break things down into manageable chunks, but which chunks? In what order? How do you even know where to start? I teach this kind of stuff in my Cut the Crap newsletter that goes out every other week. It's learning science for people who give a shit and want to create courses. If you like to learn the way that I've been describing, and you need to validate your course idea before you start doing all of this work, I'm running a course jumpstart challenge. The link is in the description. In next week's video, I will be breaking backwards design down in more detail. We touched on it here. We're going to dive in next week. And that's where we start from what they need to do and work backwards, figuring out your chunks.